speaker will take us to the European perspective even more by the RePowerEU plan, and also some comments on the Net Zero Industry Act. So we want to hear more about this. And please welcome Mechthild Wörsdörfer. She's the Deputy Director General of the DG Energy in the Europe Commission. Did I get everything right now?
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And you have another glass of water.
This is from the minister.
This is the minister's glass. Exactly.
And maybe
we can take that one away as well. Thank you so much.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a real pleasure to be here. It was really great also to hear and listen to the Minister Ebba Busch, but also to Laura Cozzi, my former colleague when I was for a few years also working in the International Energy Agency. But now back to Europe. I think it's a great moment that we're here today. By the way, for me, it's a kind of heat pump week. I was happy, and I saw a few more yesterday evening and today, to already speak online, unfortunately, at the Chicago International Heat Pump event last week, and now even better to be in person in Stockholm and in this wonderful place and museum. So I have a few slides. So I will start with our way and our aim, which the European Union, together with all the member states, took. It's to become climate neutral by 2050. It looks far away, but it means that we have to start now, and we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors, be it heating, the discussion of today, and I will come back to it, but also industry, power, transport, which is a sector which hasn't done enough as well. And in order to do that, we should look at the emissions, but also keep the GDP. And the link to decouple emissions and growth has been started already, but you can see in that slide that we can and should obviously increase growth, but continue deeply our reduction of emission. To translate this, which is the focus of our policies right now, on 2030, we need to reduce by 55% our emissions by 2030. That's why we had that fantastic name, Fit for 55. And then there we see also there are different scenarios how to go there, but it's very clear that we need to decarbonize the economy, and here the building sector is one of the leading ones. We heard it from the minister, nearly 50% of our emissions are there. So I will start with explaining a little bit what we did, or are still doing, because it's ongoing, the work on the Fit for 55 and 2030. I will go then to RePower and also the industrial side of our work. So we have an ambitious package since nearly 2 years on the table, and I will only pick up those who are extremely relevant for heat pumps, because I won't go to all the legislation we have been looking at. And I would like to start with the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And I'm very happy that you managed to get the rapporteur, Kieran Kaff, here with us. And we can certainly continue the discussion because it's at a crucial stage. The Commission proposed a new, revised European Performance of Buildings Directive. And I think it's really important that we focus on these different aspects, and that the negotiations on our proposal with the European Parliament and the Council, which will start in a few days, will really bring the results in the next month. So we have chosen a more systemic approach by member states in their national building renovation plans. So it's more this idea to focus on existing buildings, which is still 75%, and most of them are energy inefficient, but also on new buildings, and we want them to become zero-emission buildings by 2030, and also that the less efficient buildings with energy performance certificate F and G to be renovated to minimum performance level by 2020 33. So there is a clear path to really go from this very bad energy performance EPC certificates, F and G, and I know a number of cities even are working, I realize the French, but also in other places are really doing a lot. We also include in our proposal the phase out of fossil fuel appliances at national level, and we know that's also a big debate in Germany, but also in other places, how to best do this phase out of, for example, installation of new fossil fuel boilers, which we really don't want, and the introduction of fossil-free, like heat pumps. And I'm very happy to be here, as the minister has also mentioned. Sweden is one of the leading countries here, with 60% of all family buildings having heat pumps. So we are in the crucial phase of this Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and we want to keep as much as possible, and the Swedish presidency will start very soon with the negotiation, but it will go under the Spanish presidency to conclude. Another piece of legislation in that context to shape the right direction where we need to go is the Energy Efficiency Directive, and we were very happy with the Swedish EU presidency in March. We concluded provisionally, but it's approved, to have increased ambition of 11.7% of final energy use reduction for 2030. And I think this is really crucial, because it gives us an annual saving rate of 1.49, which all the member states have to do on average from now to 2030. It's really doubling the efforts to do it. And we have in our proposal, and that was also adopted, singled out also the public sector. Public sector needs to lead by example. It was a tough negotiation, in particular with the council, but we have also included the public sector, where it is required to renovate each year at least 3% of the total floor area of buildings owned by public bodies. And we also make the link with our national energy and climate plans, where member states needs to come up in the next weeks with how they go about with all the different sectors to reach those ambitious 2030 target. The real idea is there's a strong shift also here in the EED from fossil fuel to renewable heatings in buildings. Another crucial element, and I only, as I said, focus here why we have put also the Renewable Energy Directive. We concluded provisionally, because there is still the last steps to be taken under the Swedish EU presidency in the next week, that for renewables we want really to accelerate to have 42.5 EU binding target for renewables. It's huge. We are at 22, 23. So it's nearly doubling the acceleration of all renewables, wind, solar, what you can do by 2030. And that includes an indicative target of at least 49% renewable energy share in buildings in 2030. And also here we are only at 23. So here also nearly or definitely a doubling in the buildings of the renewable energy share. And last but not least, we have also adopted recently the Emission Trading System, which will extend progressively to the building energy use, which with fuels for heating, including a carbon price, by 2027. So I think it's a package which really tries to also target the heating sector from a regulatory framework, being via the Energy Efficiency Directive, the buildings as the crucial element, but also combine it with renewables and an ETS price. It's quite ambitious, it's quite a lot of effort, and there is also a new fund, for example, which accompany the ETS, which is the Social Climate Fund, which is really there to help the vulnerable consumer, because we all know it's a transition where we need to take care of everyone, and that is also a role for the member states, a role for the EU level, but also for regional and local level. But one element here is the funding via the Social Climate Fund. Secondly, I will speak about RePowerEU. You already heard it. It's our strong reply to the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. We had 40% of gas imports from Russia a year ago in January 22. We are below 8% of Russian gas imports to the EU. So mainly, a lot of our member states have phased out gas supply from Russia. Germany did it, a number of other member states did it. There's still a little flow of Russian gas to some of our EU member states, but even that we should completely phase out by 2027. But how to do that? I mean, it was a huge energy crisis. It was a huge, unprecedented energy shock. Last year, a lot happened, and we want to focus here on three things: energy savings and energy efficiency. And I was also happy the minister mentioned that as one of the key tools. Secondly, at least in the short and medium term, we have to replace Russian gas because industry and others still needs gas for some time. But also thirdly, and I think this is really absolutely crucial, it's really accelerating the clean energy transition. And that's where we put the renewables targets, higher targets, the energy efficiency, the heat pumps. And I will come back to that, the acceleration of heat pumps. In all that, we have also good news, because last year we had an increase unforeseeable or unhappened so far, foreseeable increase in renewables capacity, both in solar and wind. This I can jump. This was linked to what I said about the RePowerEU and the need for investments and all what is there also in RePower for the heat pumps. And also, obviously, the main aim is here not only the climate change driver, which remains hugely important, but also, as it was mentioned, economic growth, but also security of supply, less dependence from anybody, but particularly Russia. When it comes now to our latest, and I think it's good that we can discuss it here as well, because we focused over the years a lot about high and ambitious targets, about deployment of renewables and other low-carbon fossil-free sources. But now, when we look at how can we make sure that EU is benefiting from all of that, and in particular, EU industry. Laura Cozzi mentioned that the solar industry was a front runner for EU industry some 20 years ago. We have lost a lot to China production. There's still some players in Europe, but much less than it used to be. So we need to make sure that we are the driver around the clean energy technologies. And this Net Zero Industrial Act, like we call it, is not only a reply to IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Obviously, this was one of the triggers, but I think we need to look at the competitiveness, at the strength of the European Union and our member states. I think it's not all black and white that the US with IRA can do everything better and we have to look at EU. We have much stronger electricity grids. We had, even in the critical year last year, no blackouts. And it was really critical in some countries because nuclear was less than usual. In some other countries, because of the drought, we had to replace gas. So it was a mixture, and still, with all the stakeholders, industry, TSOs, and all the players, there was no blackout. So we have some strengths in Europe, but we still have to be more, and that the EU either keeps or becomes the leaders and these technologies. We have in our Net Zero Industrial Act singled out 5 key technologies, and heat pump is one of these 5, where we want to keep the leadership of manufacturing in Europe. And you are all great examples of what's happening here. So we have a number of measures how we could go about it. Permitting is one of them, to speed up permitting. We already have it in our Renewables Directive, but it shouldn't be only for renewables, it should be also for our deployment of clean energy technology. It's also about skills to attract the right installers, for example. It's about critical material, which is also an area where we had put together with our Net Zero Industrial Acts a proposal in mid-March. So there is a lot of attention. There is even a target of at least 40% of manufacturing capacity in the future in Europe for these clean technology. But it varies a lot if you speak about batteries, electrolyzers, or heat pumps. So there is a lot of focus and debate right now, and rightly so. So we try really hard to improve together with industry and our member states to go about it. And my last point, my last slide, is about our upcoming heat pump action plan. So out of all these, what we did, which gives the frame, we really want to focus on a heat pump accelerator and how to make sure that we are really looking at the decarbonization of the heating system. It's not an easy transition. It's quite complex. There are some technical issues. There are some locally and important implications for citizens. And here I can only underline what has been said before, the communication, which in some of our countries, one I know quite well, is not always going in the right direction. So we need to improve communication to our citizens, propose solutions in the right sense, because there is a high risk that it's not happening. As I said last time, for us in this action plan, we want that heat pumps become the new boiler. So a close follow-up will remain necessary, and in particular during the ramp-up. So in addition, what we have in the Net Zero Industrial Act, in this specific heat pump action plan, we see 4 priorities: the accelerator partnership with the Commission, member states, and the sector. We want a broad cooperation between all relevant stakeholders, including academia, industry, also research community, and obviously the region and the member states. And also to look at the dependence, why heat pumps should be deployed higher, and that is this favorable electricity-gas price ratio, which was already mentioned. Second, as I said, communication and skills, raising awareness, and also looking at solution, and we want a dedicated skills partnership on heat pump. It cannot all come from Brussels. We need definitely the national, regional, and local level here. We will look at the ongoing legislative work, which I mentioned in the beginning, that we want really de facto prevent the sale of new standalone boilers by 2029, and also the EPBD, which I mentioned in the beginning, is a crucial part of that. And last but not least, it's financing. So we do a mapping of the financing possibilities. I think we are all aware that sometimes the EU is a bit more complex when it comes to the different funds. There is a lot. There are the regional funds, there are the innovation fund, the recovery and resilience plans, and so on. But sometimes it's not easy. So we do a mapping, in particular, what's possible for heat pump deployment, and then continue that dialogue with all the stakeholders. So let me conclude. We see that Sweden is one of the front runner, but we also need to make it happen everywhere. Electrification is key, and decarbonization of our heating system with a clear role on the heat pump. And with our action plan, we will really also drive that communication and define concrete actions. We had an action plan on digitalization of European energy policy last year, and we are still looking at all the different action to make it happen together with colleagues and the member states. So thank you very much for now. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so